Now, moving on, if we're going to really talk about telling the truth, then there's a story that's been kind of going viral lately concerning somebody that I follow who I think is a great podcaster, a guy named Matt Fradd with Pints with Aquinas, and then somebody who I have personal affection for and somebody that I've met personally and even spent time at his house, Dennis Prager. Now, the scenario is something like this, that Dennis Prager is being accused of supporting and condoning child pornography, and the internet has gone in outrage mode against Dennis Prager. Now, if that is true, then I agree. You should be outraged. But the real question is that true? I'll let you hear Dennis Prager's comments with Matt Fradd himself here.
Says, I view animated child porn. So there's no real victim in that sense of child pornography, which we both agree is horrendous. And by viewing animated child porn, it prevents me from acting out sexually on a child. Now, I deny that. I think that pornography inflames us to then want to act those fantasies out, and I think there's good studies that back that up. But surely you wouldn't say to the man who views animated child pornography, that's not bad so long as you don't act it out. Wouldn't you want to help this poor sick dude?
Yes, I would, but I'm thrilled that he's not acting it out. I mean,
agreed.
Okay,
of course.
Well, that's big.
Yeah.
We're both thrilled that he might have a poor substitute, but it is a substitute if that were the case. No child is being used. Yeah. It's all animated.
Yeah.
And he.
But would you use the word evil of animated child pornography? Because I certainly would.
No, I would use evil only with behavior. That's where we might differ.
Yeah.
Forgetting the sex issue, you can't be evil. You didn't do evil if you thought evil. You did evil
if I'm
if you
masturbating
committed.
to animated pictures of pornography, I'm not doing something evil.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think that's despicable. Yeah.
Really?
Yes, of course.
Who is being hurt? You have to have a victim.
Oh, I'll tell you, there's at least two people being hurt. There's the person who's poisoning himself by encouraging him to think acting out on children, and there's also the animator.
Okay, wait a minute. We both are aching for him not to have those fantasies. I agree with you, but
you won't call it evil.
I won't call a fantasy evil.
All right, so you heard it there yourself. Dennis Prager is arguing that animated child pornography, it doesn't really hurt anybody because it's a cartoon rather than an actual person, and so he can justify it from an intellectual standpoint based upon the argument that he's making. So, okay, all right, I get it. This is a challenging place to defend Dennis Prager, and I'm not really going to do that, but I'm just going to try to help us be kind of a little bit reasonable here and step back emotionally from this statement or series of statements made by these two men. So the first thing I just want to mention is just simply this, that we need to be charitable even with our enemies because we want the best version of their argument so that we can absolutely destroy it with facts and logic. We don't want our enemies up in arms or angry at us or being ticked off because we're simply ad hominem attacking them. There is a place for that, to be sure, and I think there are things that deserve to be mocked, so trust me, you've heard it on the show before. I'm not turning over a new leaf as far as that's concerned. I believe it's necessary, and I believe it's moral to mock things that are egregiously immoral. So nonetheless, but I also do believe that it's important to be charitable with our enemies and try to give them the best interpretation so that we can destroy that rather than just straw manning. So hopefully that makes sense. And for those of you who don't know, straw manning means creating the weakest argument by our enemy so that we can destroy that, but then we're not really destroying their actual argument. So we need to create the best argument that we can for our enemies so that we can show that it is illogical, irrational, and foolish rather than creating a fake argument that they're not actually making. So it's important to be charitable with our enemies in that regard. But it's also important to be charitable with our friends, not just simply because they're our friends, but because we know them. If you know the heart and the mind behind the people that are talking, it's important to give them the kind of charity that is necessary to hear what they're actually saying. And this is where Dennis comes into play. Dennis, for over 30 years, has been a leading conservative voice. And I just have to tell you here, Dennis is not making an argument that child pornography is okay. I want to get into the argument that he's actually making, but essentially, Dennis is a behaviorist, and he's just simply saying that your behavior is what matters more than kind of the ideas that you have. Now, this goes back into something that Dennis Prager said with Jordan Peterson on a Exodus kind of series that he did with him. You can hear his words here.
We have no equivalent that if you look upon another woman with lust, it's as if you have committed adultery with your heart. There's only one way to commit adultery in Judaism, and it's with a different organ. And I'm not being cute. I'm being very realistic. Looking with lust is not a sin in Judaism.
So essentially, as a behaviorist, Dennis Prager is just simply saying that there's a difference between the internal life and the external life. And he's making a more broad argument that what you say you believe is not as important as how you behave. So if you say you're a Christian, but then you go around killing people, or let's even be a little bit more realistic. Let's say you're a Christian, but you go around committing adultery on your wife repeatedly with multiple women. Well, I don't care what you say you believe. You're not acting like a Christian. So your belief is totally irrelevant when we look at your behavior. Now, this, in that way, is an argument that a million other Christian preachers have made without ever truly using those words. Essentially, Dennis Prager is saying that the ideas that you have inside of your head aren't necessarily sin unless you act upon those things. Well, suffice to say, this is where I also think Dennis is wrong, and he's dead wrong. It's clear that the sins of your mind and what you believe are intimately connected with your behavior. In fact, I would argue that porn is a behavior, first of all, that is a volitional act of the will. So you don't have you don't watch porn simply because you have a behavior. You watch porn because you also have a belief. Now, this is true of all of us. Whenever we do something, it comes from some place. I know that cognitive dissonance, happens and that we do things that don't match what we actually say we believe. But the reality is, even if it's not a formalized belief, all the time we do things and justify our actions based upon a belief somewhere deep down inside. And porn is especially egregious in this way. Not only is it a belief, but it is also a behavior. So I don't really know why Dennis can get off by saying that, hey, I think there's a distinction between, what you actually do and kind of the lustful ideas that you have when it comes to this kind of thing. Because porn objectifies women, even if you're not specifically engaged with the woman. So it aids in her abuse. If you truly believe, and it is, that pornography is abuse, just by purchasing the magazine, what you're doing is promoting the abuse of that woman. Now, secondly, it damages the man and almost always leads to a behavior. Now, maybe you can read between the lines here what I'm actually saying. So if you think that watching porn is really not a behavior, but really just a belief, and actually doesn't lead to any real action in the world, and that nobody would be harmed by child pornography, I have to argue with you a little bit here. Even if it is just pleasuring yourself, you are participating in a behavior in association with your lustful ideas. Few would argue that cartoons of white people beating up and hanging a black man would do anything other than damage the mind and damage the behavior of an individual. So there is not this clear distinction between the interior life and the exterior life like Dennis wants to believe. And this is the most important dichotomy here that Dennis tries to make, but it isn't one that is borne out by the evidence. Dr. Juliana Brianis says this: one of the most basic ways that beliefs can shape reality is through their influence on behavior. So does that mean that belief may influence the behavior but not cause it? So in other words, does that mean that you can be influenced by your beliefs, but it doesn't necessarily follow that what you're doing is caused by it? No, every behavior is born out of the heart. This is what Jesus was saying when he says that he that lusts after another woman is committing adultery in his heart. So in other words, for Jews, there's this distinct dichotomy between belief and behavior. And for Christians, and I think for most people, they would say your behavior is derived from your belief, that you cannot separate those two things. So what you can say about Dennis is he's wrong and dead wrong. What you can say about Dennis is that he has an idea because he's a behaviorist and he's trying to force because he wants to be intellectually consistent, he's trying to force his definition to work by saying that a person who watches animated child pornography is actually not violating any child or anything like that because they're not actually practicing a behavior that does that. Now, I'll just say that because he is so committed to this belief, he is being illogical and being consistent, but he's doing the best that he can to try to be consistent with his belief, but he's just dead wrong. So now I must step away from that and just say this. Here's what you cannot say about Dennis Prager. You cannot say he's a pedophile. You cannot say he's creating pedophiles. And you cannot say anything other than that he's entitled to be wrong. Again, Dennis Prager is somebody that's on our side. He's not truly defending child porn. He's trying to defend his position, and he's just finding himself in the unfortunate predicament where he realizes his argument actually doesn't work, and it's made him look like he's defending child porn. See, I think it's important for us to really kind of suss out these facts when we think about them, not only so that we can be charitable to Dennis Prager, but simply so that we can understand arguments and understand them as clearly as possible so that we don't simply paint a too easy picture of somebody that we disagree with. Now, is it important to call Dennis out on the kind of inconsistency of his belief here and actually where his belief leads? By the way, I think he's being logically consistent. I just think that his belief actually doesn't work, and it is not borne out by the facts, and it ultimately leads to some reprehensible conclusions, as Matt Fradd said in the clip. And so in keeping with the theme of the show today, I would just say this, that the moral of the story is that we need to be careful about the lies that we tell ourselves. Because I believe Dennis has a flawed belief, and he's trying to justify it logically. That's why it's all that much more important that the things that we believe are correct. Now, as a Christian, and Dennis being a Jew, I agree with Dennis very often, but I think Dennis's Judaism here is influencing what he believes as a behaviorist. I think he needs to listen to Jesus a little bit more and realize that the dichotomy between the inner life and the exterior life are actually not that disconnected. Jews believe that they are, but Christians don't. Christians believe that ultimately your actions are predicated based upon your belief. And so it's important to get your beliefs right so that your behavior can follow. So you just got done watching a small excerpt of a much larger episode. You can find the link to that full episode down below in the description of this video. So you definitely want to check that out, because if you like that clip, you'll like the much larger episode. And while you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click that little bell to be notified when great new episodes of Indie Thinker come your way. Thanks for watching.